disruptive.
Weird thing to happen. So in Canada, you know that we've been having a situation with the temporary foreign worker program. We've discussed at length how corporations are abusing it, how companies are abusing, lying to the government and making fraudulent claims that they can't hire Canadians, an excuse to get temporary foreign workers, and that's partly because of our mass immigration policy, and also the fact that the government, as we saw in a previous segment, the government actually subsidized all this. So companies are getting paid to screw over Canadian workers. And that's why they're hiring people, immigrants and migrants at stab wages and treat them like slaves as compared to hiring a Canadian and treating them like an actual employee. So Mark Dalia, who has an amazing TikTok, he does a breakdown. He's like the Norse Ian Carroll. He's one of those guys. He's very good at researching things. He's really good at pointing out the facts. He's one of these people. Shows this video. It says it's happening at corporate levels as well. I hear it directly from Canadians. It's a much bigger problem than people realize. Ridiculous. So he's showing a video here of this guy at a Pizza, which is very famous pizza chain here in Canada. Very notable phone number. Like, I don't think there's any Canadian citizen that doesn't know what Pizza is. And there's a video here of this guy looking to submit a resume into Pizza, but the people at Pizza block him. And here's why. What they suggest why. Listen to this.
You guys have a job sign on the window that says now hiring, correct? Actually, correct? What it is.
So the gentleman recording the video, he said that there's a help wanted sign, there's a job available sign in the window, and the guy working at the counter is going to gaslight him. Is going to try and gaslight him. So, watch this.
I know what it is, though. You guys aren't hiring you're not hiring outside of your race. That's what it is, right? She told me that the job's been taken. You told me that there's already a guy here. And now you're saying to me, sir, that, oh, I can't say anything. You have to wait till my boss comes. That's what's going on. So I want you people to see today that I am being refused in Canada a job from West Indians. Her here, and this man. Run. You too. Okay? Both of you. Okay? Really bad service. Really bad service. Okay? So take the sign down off the window, because that's what you need to do. Because now
So, as I've been saying throughout all this, that I'm not anti-immigrant. And I have to defend this because people automatically assume that anytime I mention about this topic or bring this video to attention, people automatically assume, oh, you're so bigoted and racist, and how dare you? These people are just trying to make a living and do their due diligence. How dare you go against people just because they're a different race? Again, I'm extremely pro-immigrant. I have no problem with anybody coming into this country legally and making way and trying to make a living in this great nation. We thrive on multiculturalism. We thrive. That's part of our nation. It's part of our credence of what makes Canada great. The problem with this is the abuse that comes out of mass migration and illegal immigration, that they're purposely undermining Canadians and purposely undermining even legal migrants to get people pouring into this country to replace the workforce. And this is an example of this. This is an example of this, where you have a company that's offering to hire people, or they have a job posting available on, say, LinkedIn or Indeed or Workopolis. They have a position available. You put in your application, even though they're not going to hire you. They're not going to hire you. They're not looking at your application. They're not doing any of that, because one of two things: either one, it's a what they call a ghost job, meaning that they just manufacture a fake job posting to get a bunch of resumes in the door so they have the information on file, or two, they've already given it to an illegal migrant for slave wages, because you don't have to pay them a living wage as you would do an actual employee. They're giving it to illegal migrants, giving away that job to that person, which, again, I don't blame the immigrants. I blame the corporation for abusing both sides of the party. That they're taking away jobs from capable Canadians and putting them towards illegals so they can get cheap labor. That's what's happening here. And as we're approaching the summer months, there was a huge number of news stories, and I wish I covered this on the show today, but I didn't have time to throw it in. But there's a huge amount of stories right now where young people, as summer is approaching and they're getting out of school and maybe looking for that quick summer job, that seasonal job, are realizing that there's none available. And not because things are going downhill and there's no companies that are offering work, but it's because the jobs are being thrown over away from Canadian youth and given to the temporary migrants. And they're cutting back, and they're stomping on labor purposely, and getting cut back and getting givebacks from the government by doing this. They're getting subsidized for hiring illegal migrants. So, which leads into this. So, Conservative MP Jamil Javani calls for an end to the temporary foreign workers program. He calls it a cheap labor program that takes Canadian jobs and suppresses wages. Do you agree with Jamil? So, this is a guy, a Conservative MP who won in, I think it's Bowmanville, Oshawa area. I knew someone actually in Bowmanville. Went to college with me. Didn't realize it was near Ottawa or Oshawa. So, Conservative MP Jamil Javani calls for an end to the temporary foreign workers program. The reason I'm highlighting this is because I think this is incredible. I think this is really incredible, the fact that this MP is actually willing to address this. Because no real politician in Canada is ever bothered to mention about this. Not a single politician. They try to feed around the bush. They try to go around it. The most I've ever heard of anyone saying this is Maxime Bernier of the People's Party. That's the only person I've ever seen even having a discussion or even bring notice to this is Maxime Bernier. But now you get this guy who's been elected as the Conservative MP calling to an end to the temporary foreign worker program. So, on his website here, MP for Bowmanville, Oshawa North. So, on his website here, says the temporary foreign worker program is a large contributor to Canada's immigration system, getting out of control with unsustainable immigration levels. The TFWP is taking jobs away from Canadians and holding down wages of Canadian workers, which that's exactly what it's doing, because it's done that by design. The billionaire class who control and operate, they're the ones pushing for mass migration. They're the ones pushing for open doors. They're the ones pushing for this influx of newcomers into Canada that we Canadians cannot deal with. And it's not a race-bait issue. It's not xenophobic. It's not, Islamophobia. It's simple mathematics. It's simple mathematics. When you have millions and millions of newcomers into a country and you don't have the services, you don't have the housing, you don't have the requirements to meet the needs of people that are already here dealing with issues of Canada, and you want to bring more people into that mess. It's just it's not possible. It's not possible whatsoever. But Justin Trudeau, Mark Miller, now Mark Carney here want to increase that. Why? Because they're serving the needs of the billionaire class. They're serving the needs of the WEF. They're serving the needs of people at the Century Initiative who want 100 million, a population of 100 million in Canada by the end of the century. And we don't have the services to keep up with all this. That's why Justin Trudeau, before he resigned there, had to do a 180 and say, we're going to put a pause on mass migration for Canada to keep up. But it's still not working. It's still not working because corporations are abusing this power nonstop. So he calls from January to October 2024, over 160,000 new work permits were issued under the foreign worker program. Canadian economists have observed that the availability of temporary foreign worker provides an opportunity for businesses to hire foreign workers for lower wages and unfavorable working conditions. Again, all by design, by the billionaire class, by the lobby firms, because they don't care. They don't care about the working class. They don't care about Canadians. They have no interest in serving the needs of Canadians, and they don't respect sovereignty. They don't respect individualism. They don't respect any of our values of Canadians. So they're just going to pour people in and throw them a bone into giving them a job, throw them a bone into temporary housing, and screw over Canadians, screw over legal immigrants that went through the checkpoints and challenges to become residents here. That's why legal immigrants are so pissed off at this. Iron Workers Union Local 97 has called on the federal government to immediately end the temporary foreign worker program, instead invest in Canadian workers and protect Canadian jobs. Youth unemployment in Canada, ages 15 to 24, rose from about 9% in 2022 to an overall 14% in 2024. The highest level in more than a decade, excludes the COVID-19 period. In Toronto, the number of unemployed youth jumped 50% in 2 years, surpassing 120,000. The temporary foreign worker program has led to a sharp rise in foreign workers in youth-dominated sectors like food service and retail. In Ontario, Tim Hortons has hired at least 714 temporary foreign workers in 2023, up from just 58 in 2019. This surge has increased competition for entry-level jobs, making it harder for young Canadians to find work. For the sake of Canadians' agricultural industry, the fraction of the temporary foreign workers classified as seasonal agricultural workers should be treated as a separate program and not lumped in with the broader temporary foreign worker program that leads to the suppression of Canadian wages. So, I can't disagree with this guy. He's definitely on ball with this. He's definitely pointing out a lot of flaws with this. And again, because I know people are going to clip this, they're going to do reactionary and say that, oh, this is so bigoted. How dare you? How dare you criticize immigrants? They've already had a hard enough life. I'd say this about anybody. It doesn't matter what part of the world you come from. If it's Ukrainians, if they're taking Ukrainians and abusing them for cheap labor to undermine Canadians, I would say the exact same thing. Because the problem with this is not the migrant themselves. It's the abuse from corporations. It's the abuse of power and the breaching of abusing temporary foreign workers, which is supposed to be minimal. It's only supposed to be a last resort if corporations cannot find actual workers to fill positions, then they can go to that measure. But because they're abusing it for their own whims and woes, that's what's so serious about this. And now you have unemployment that's continuing to trickle up. You have youth unemployment that's skyrocketing. And you have an economy here in Canada that is barely holding afloat. Because if you don't have a strong enough workforce, if you don't have people getting an income and being able to contribute to Canada, then Canada's over. Canada's over with. But companies like Tim Hortons and retail establishments like Walmart and so many other places are going to take advantage of this. So kudos on this guy for pointing this out. He says, today I was officially sworn as the MP for Bowmanville, Oshawa North. My first action, calling for an end to the temporary foreign workers program. No more cheap labor programs that take Canadian jobs and suppress wages. Not only is this guy saying it, but we've shown you that the UN themselves had to get a special rapporteur to make an article, to make a case that Canadians are being abused and that migrants are being abused for slave labor with these corporations. So even the UN has spoken out about this. The UN spoken about this. This guy, now elected as an MP, is finally bringing attention to this. So let's hear what he has to say. Pretty long speech, but it's very interesting.
I've been thinking about how I want to approach the job as an MP this time around. And a lot of it, I think, is about, now that I understand a bit better how Ottawa works, trying to pierce what I would describe as the Ottawa bubble more often and more frequently. Over the course of the campaign, when you're knocking on doors and you're talking to people, you have, I think, a clear sense of how people feel about a lot of different issues. But oddly, when you come to this place, you sometimes encounter a culture here where it's not very clear whether people understand what the common sense priorities are of the average hardworking family. Liberals have been in power here for going on over a decade now, and I think their worldview, their priorities, their approach to important policy issues has shaped the way Ottawa works. You know, and I'll give you a very specific example of that. The issue of immigration, right? So every day I'm knocking on doors and I'm talking to people of all different backgrounds and walks of life about immigration. And there's a pretty clear consensus, even across people with different political views, that immigration levels are just unsustainably high. Anyone who goes to a hospital can see there's not enough beds. Anyone who goes to look for a family doctor can't find one. You go to buy a house, there's not enough of those. You go to find a job, there might not be one of those for you either.
So again, just like I've been stating, that this is not about race, this is not, you know, being anti-woke. Like, it's, don't go down the identity BS, because that's their defense for this abuse. But what I'm stating, and what a lot of people are stating, is that this is simple mathematics. If you don't have the services to provide to the needs of the people that are already here, how do you expect more newcomers to shuffle in and to incorporate into this country when we don't have the needs to keep up with people? We have population booms all over communities that are shutting down ERs, that don't have schools that are equipped to deal with mass amount of people that don't speak English or French. You have companies right now that are barely offering jobs to people, and it's being snatched up by the migrants for cheap labor. So it's all simple mathematics. And that's why at the last resort, you know, Justin Trudeau was was pushing it in hard as ever. And many of the prime ministers beforehand were trying to push this. But Justin Trudeau in particular, at last minute, said, oh, we're going to do a slight pause. We're going to pause the immigration. And then he resigned. And now Mark Carney's ushered in. Now Mark Carney is the prime minister, and he's going to boost it even more because Mark Carney used to serve as the board of the Century Initiative that wants this population boom. They want more people shuffling to Canada so they can take more control of these people, so they can abuse the migrants for cheap labor. That's what all this is about. Cheap labor and scaring them for votes. And what this guy is saying is that simple mathematics determines that Canada cannot do this. Canada cannot survive a population boom this quickly and this severely.
And it seems very common sense when you're knocking on doors and you're canvassing and you're talking to people on the street that this is an issue that needs to be tackled. But we are now entering year 10 or 11 of a culture in Ottawa where you cannot even really have a sensible conversation about it. And it really shouldn't be hard. I'll give you an example. I'm canvassing in North Oshawa last year for the by-election where I first got elected. And I meet a gentleman who cannot speak English. Tried to talk to him, but communication barrier just made it hard, and very nice guy though. I see him again a year later in this most recent election, and he knows a little bit more English this time. And you know what he says to me? Too much immigration. And I said, sir, your English is impeccable. Now, he didn't know a lot of words, but he knew enough to get that point across because he knew what he was experiencing and feeling on the ground. He didn't have to be in Canada very long to see that. And that's what I'm trying to get across when I say what it looks like to bring common sense to Parliament.
And what's funny about this is that now there's a huge amount of migrants that came into Canada in search of a better life that are exiting Canada because they realize this is not a better life. Because Canada is abusing people left, right, and center, regardless of race, regardless of credence. That corporations are abusing their powers. They're massively corrupted to the teeth to abuse this temporary foreign worker program, which is supposed to be a last resort, and use them as cheap labor. So they can segregate their labor force, push away Canadian workers, stomp on the Canadian economy and the middle class, working class of Canadians, and push for cheap labor. And even the people coming into this country are finally catching up to the game. They're catching up to the scam. That people that newcomers that barely speak English are saying that there's too much immigration. There's too much of a push for immigration. There's not enough border protection. And when you don't have border protection, you don't have sovereignty. You don't have sovereignty. As Bernie Sanders once said, that open borders is a Koch brothers idea. He used to say that. You know who else is worried about immigration? Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, a lot of lefties and liberals and the Democrats and liberals here in Canada. We're so concerned about immigration until about 2015. Why around 2015? Well, that's because a guy by the name of George Soros, many people know about that name. George Soros, the philanthropic billionaire, wrote letters to the UK, to Canada, to the United States, to Australia, to all the developed nations, and demanded for open borders. Why? Because corporations that are tied with George Soros and NGOs tied with George Soros were using this to their advantage. So they wanted countries, they wanted developed nations to change their laws, to change their legal system and their immigration stature to allow for this increased migration, even though Canada's not prepared for it. And that's why you get someone like Donald Trump that's doing mass deportations. And as much as I don't agree with deporting college students for writing op-eds, mass deportation in America still seems to be a favorable policy in America. because of the situation that they're in. And it's now continuing to grow in a place like Canada. There's more to this.
The first thing I'm going to do as the Member of Parliament for Bowmanville, Oshawa North, is launch a petition to end the Temporary Foreign Workers Program. This program has been a disaster for workers in this country. From January to October of 2024 alone, over 160,000 work permits were issued for this program. And a fraction of those for seasonal agricultural work might make sense, but the vast majority are putting a crunch on the workforce in this country. Youth unemployment hit 14%, the highest it's been in a decade, not counting COVID years. And a lot of young people are struggling to find their first job, their first opportunity in the job market. The wages for Canadian workers have gone down dramatically because of programs like the Temporary Foreign Workers Program. And I understand that the Liberals will say they've taken action on the immigration issue. Prime Minister Mark Carney just put out a mandate letter that said he wanted to reform immigration. But I think we need to hold them to a higher standard than just empty words. The Globe and Mail just published an article where economists are pointing out there are hundreds of thousands of people in Canada who have overstayed their visas and the government has lost track of them. When we say the immigration system has some very serious flaws, we mean it. And I can think of no better way to anchor how we move forward than thinking about this from what is in the best interests of Canadian workers and Canadian families. So I think things need to be shaken up around here. I think the Ottawa bubble needs to be pierced. I think common sense needs to be said. That is what I pledge to do as the Member of Parliament for Bowmanville, Oshawa North, as a member of the Conservative Party team. I'm excited by the opportunity to be a voice for people who are often not heard in this country, and I will work very, very hard to do my best in making sure they are heard.
So, again, hard to complain what he said there. I'm glad that he mentioned it, and I agree with the statements, but we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes, because Conservative, Liberal, NDP, Green Party, no matter who's in control, no matter what political party they're part of, they're all captured by the same NGOs, the same lobby firms that have been pushing this for quite a long time. And it just doesn't seem to move a muscle. Even with the faux pas promises of Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau and Mark Miller saying, oh, we should have thought about this sooner, and we should have done something about this. Well, now, here we are, it's still not happening. They're promising more and more mass migration, opening borders, and decrease. Because, again, it's far beyond just one politician or one political party. This is the annihilation of Canada's sovereignty, of the borders, of the whole identity of this nation, to flood in people for cheap labor, for corporations, for cheap votes, for political establishment to continue on the thrive of the WEF agenda, and also just the means of control. It's easier to control people if they're all centralized in one area. So let's bring as many people as possible, turn them into 15-minute cities so that we can have mass control over a bigger population than would be to control individual nations all across the world. That's the whole trajectory. That's the whole 2030. That's what George Soros and Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and Klaus Schwab and who's the new WF guy? The guy from Nestle, the James Bond villain. The James Bond villain from Nestle are all pledging for that. So, thank God for this guy, Jamil Javani of Bowmanville, for speaking up about this. But we'll see where it goes. If he follows through on this, I'll give more credit. But all I could say is he's saying the right words. Now let's see this in action.